there, this is Chad from Zombie Fight Shark, and today we're going to be talking about best practices in Reason. And I've created a pop template that it's fairly generic, but I'm using it as an example to show some things that I do on a regular basis whenever I am working on a track. And in this case, it's pop, but you could call it whatever, commercial. And every track is different. So the things that you hear in this one are not necessarily going to be true every time. And I've made this fairly basic, and it may not seem like that after we talk about it for a little while, but it will. I've used sounds strictly from the Reason library. So this is Reason 11. So if you have the most current version of Reason, then you should be able to download this from zombiefightshark.com, and you can play with it to your heart's content. The only rack extension that I used in this was Remark that you see here, and it is free, and you can get it from the store, from the Reason Studios store. I'm going to play this short track. It's nothing special. It's just an example for something, for a jumping off point, if you will. Take a listen, or you can skip ahead. It's not a very long track, and then we'll get into what exactly is going on here. So enjoy. Okay, that was it. So nothing crazy. Like I said, it's just a jumping off point. And I wanted to talk about best practices. And I will be the first person to admit that I do not follow all of the things that I'm about to tell you. But I try. And what I've found is that when I get into sessions where I've got a ton of tracks, or if it's something I'm getting paid for, or if it's a personal project that I know is going to be a long-term project, that I'm going to put a lot of time into the mix and just getting everything perfect. That these are things that I've done, and I tend to do them fairly consistently. If you apply them to your own work, then they will just help you with some organization stuff. So first, you saw the rack extension, the rack here. So we'll just talk about the rack a little bit here. Things that you can see, I used Remark, and I've sorted it: guitars, bass, drums, vocals, and then within there, I've got there's more going on. So depending on the track, I may or may not use a lot of different reverbs. Sometimes I will use one reverb for all the drums. Sometimes I will do individual tracks. And what I went for with this one was more of how I would treat it if it were like it's a studio recording, where you treat all the instruments in an isolated manner. So I have a room reverb. I have a drum control room. Reverb controlled room, not control room, controlled room reverb here. But then a lot of other stuff, I used a separate reverb for it. Since we're talking about drums, let's look at those. I've got a drum bus, and the drum bus, I've used this drums combinator here. It's a factory template one. Then the routing on this is where stuff gets kind of silly. So like you see, this is all sidechain stuff. So we'll get into that here in a little bit when we talk about vocals, and I'll just go ahead and apologize for those vocals because they are what they are. But yeah, that's all sidechain, so you can ignore that for a moment. We'll get to it shortly. So these are not the greatest drum sounds in the world, but it was more about making the point of what can you do, with, if you're using the Reason factory sounds and the factory library only, and how would you go about, making the most of it. Here's my, here's all of our sounds. And the thing I want you to look at is right here, drum output. And as I click through, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 5, 6, 3, 4, 15, 16, 9, 10, etc. So what does that mean? On the back side of the Kong, I have routed out all of my different sounds. So my bass drums, those 2 bass drums, they're going output 3, 4. And so see, that's 3 and 4 right there. And then it's getting routed to its own channel. And I'm treating it, if you were in the studio and you were recording drums and you were, tight micing everything, then you'd have a kick track, you'd have multiple snare tracks usually, you might have multiple hi-hat tracks, you'd have an overhead, you might have close mic toms and overhead toms, overhead cymbals. Like there's all these different variations, and you can get as silly as you want with all these. When you get into a lot of the Reason drum kits, you'll see all of those variations. If you bust those open, those combinators open, and you'll see that they're routed in that kind of way a lot of times. I've routed kick to there, hi-hats, and again, you'll see that a lot of this stuff here, I've just routed it. I'm using Reason stock stuff, because again, I just wanted, hey, this is something you can do, and you'll be able to download the template and should be able to load it right up without any problems. So, and occasionally you see that we have old school snare, and then I have a super snare reverb, and it's the combinators are separate. Here's the actual snare track, so it's coming from the Kong to here, and then chain to here, and then chain down to here into this. That's my vocal side chain. We'll talk about it in a minute. And then I used a shaker off on its own, and this one it's just a shaker. I automated it, but I did not use any special. I didn't use any extra rack units. I did not mention cymbals, so here they are. And you can see it's routing from whatever that is, at 11, 12, 9, 10, 11, 12, because I got hi-hats and crashes, and I routed them into one channel because I'm treating them the same, where I've just got a low pass on them, and then I cut them just a little bit to get out of the way of the vocals, and that's in from 2.5 to 5K range, and then boosted the high end for a little shimmer. And they do have a side chain on them, as you can see here, and then I have individual control on those, in which this isn't, like I said at the beginning, there's no right or wrong way. There's lots of ways to do this. This is just one of the ways. So if somebody else told you different and you like the way they told you and it works for you, do that. Ultimately you find there are no rules, and whatever works for you is what works for you. If you end up with a good mix, or not even a good mix, just a mix you're happy with at the end, and other people say it sounds good, and then doesn't matter what rules you followed or which broke. These are just things that might help you along the way. Just a note, so the kick I did not care for very much, and I actually added this outcast kick for a little bit more bass in the kick drum, and you can see I have the gate out running into here. So when you trigger the kick, it's actually triggering both of those at the same time. And then I kind of just mixed them, down, kind of just quieted down this kick, and then just sort of played with the levels a little bit until I was happy with. I had enough of the bass from that outcast kick, and then it was kind of snappy, the pop kick or the dry kit that I had there. So that's just a little extra trick there. To summarize that one more time, if you're using Kong, that is, you can load your Kong kit here, and then you can route everything in here out of your drum outputs down here. And then from there, once you've routed them here, then you're routing them to their own channels. And once they're on their own channels, then you have, from there you can add effects to each individual instrument. And it's easier to do. There's, again, other ways to do it, but that's the easiest way. And then after I have all of these and I've done all my tweaking and everything that I want to do to it, then I routed all of them to the drum bus. And the drum bus again up at the top. And then my drum bus, I've just used this basic Reason one here, and just played with it a little bit to my liking, to where I was happy with it. So there's drums on the rack. We'll talk about the sequencing part of it in a moment. Let's talk about guitars. So I use this Class A acoustic. It's in the library, and this Strat Edge with mutes. Both of them I thought actually sounded pretty decent for what they were, for being out of the box. I didn't go crazy with these. I did use some, so I've got some compression going on here, and that is because I've got some sidechain stuff happening here where I wanted to be able to do bandpass compression, and you can, there's lots of ways to do this. This is kind of a standard one, been around for many years in Reason, and this is just a default Reason combinator. Your sidechain ends here on the back, and then this is I think this is coming from my vocals, and then I've chained them into these two different bands so that they're just compressing those bands. And you can look at that, download the template and check it out for yourself, and maybe it'll make a little bit more sense when you got it in front of you that way. The Strat Edge with mutes, I used, I don't normally actually use this, but I use this little player here, and it's neat. I just did something different. I gave it a try, and it was handy. I don't know that it actually saved me any time because I knew what I wanted to play, but it's a neat little trick. The Strat Edge with mutes rack here, I've used the amp, soft tube amp here, and open area. I don't think I changed much. I think I just used the default on that, and then I've got a sidechain going. So I didn't get crazy with that. And on these guys, I will use the EQ on the mixer on some stuff. On most of this track, I didn't do much because I did it on the Kabasa, because this was a really simple track, and I was EQing in other places. So I did it on my Vox there, on my background and my leads. So we'll get into that here in just a second. Let's talk about bass, because I'm all about the bass. Very simple Ampeg flip top. Love that sound. And this is one of those where I'm like, nah, it's good the way it is. And you don't have to, I think maybe it was a Butch Vig quote that I heard many years ago. I could be wrong, but I think it's him, that he said that the best tracks you do the least work on because it's already set up the way you need it to. The ones that come out sounding the best, the musicians play the best, the final product is the best, are usually ones that's like you do it in one take or two takes. It takes the least amount of work, and everybody plays their part and everything sounds great. And it's usually because it's sitting in the mix the way that it needs to without doing a lot of editing. So I try to incorporate that into my composition, whether it's if it's orchestral, that's kind of a different deal, but definitely in pop, in whatever genre that you're in, hip hop or indie or classic rock, whatever it is, you can incorporate this into your mixes. And it's that bass should play bass. Or if you're a bass player who plays a lot of high end, okay, fine, but it just makes more problems for mixing later. If you move around whatever the focus instrument is, you move all your other instruments around it in advance, you'll save yourself a ton of work on the back end. That's why I say bass should play bass. I mean, I'm a bass player, and I tend to play highfalutin lines with fancy stuff going on in them a lot of times when I'm actually playing on a physical bass. That doesn't make for easy mixing. But if you stick to the low end, then nobody else is going to be there. The only other instrument that's going to be on the low end that's going to have any conflicts when it comes to frequency is the kick drum. And getting those two to stay out of each other's way is not too hard. You can do it with a sidechain, and that's even if there's a problem. This Strat Edge, that guitar, I tried to do it with that guitar, where I was trying to I was trying to stay out of my own way with that guitar, of the other instruments and of the voice. And so, let's see, you'll hear. So I stayed on the on a range that was hopefully a little bit out of the way of the vox, of the vocals. I could have done a better job than what I did. I didn't like the sound of the Strat when it got too high up the scale, so I ended up being a little bit lower than what I originally intended to. But that's what I'm talking about, is you shape it around it. So it's like if let's say your singer's vocal line is all in like an octave range, pick an octave. You stay out of the way with the other instruments. If they're playing, if you've got a guitar, have your guitar play higher than what their range is or lower than what their range is. If you've got a piano, then move it around. If bass, stick to the bass part. If you do that, it'll just make for easier mixing. When you get everything in the same range, and I'd say this acoustic guitar is probably a good example. It's like everything starts to build up. Down here, maybe not as low as 80, but 320 to 1000, you end up getting a big hump where there's just too many instruments all at once, and that's when you start running into problems where your mix starts to get muddy. And so, you can see with everything going. See my vocal range. See, I'm trying to stay out of the way of that. And for the most part, we're pretty much out of the way. And really, to illustrate it even further, if you see where the peak is, you can see how the amplitude of those peaks. You're like, okay, it's competing with everything in this range in terms of amplitude, and there's everything else is kind of sitting below it. So you're it's gonna jump out of the mix more if you do that. There's a little bit of mixing theory, and I'm sure I said some things wrong, and I'm sure some people will be happy to tell me that I was wrong about some stuff, and that's okay, because I am not a professional. These are all just things I've learned and things I pay attention to. Let's look at the vocals here, and in a normal song, in a pop song or indie song, whatever it may be, that's going to be your most important part is vocals. You're singing a song about something. You're not singing a song with unless it's an instrumental, then it's whatever. Your guitar is the most important, but you would apply these same techniques in that case. So what did I do here? Warm female vocal combinator. Cool. All right. So that's what's going on here with this stuff. And then and then the compressor, I think that's part of that one. And then you see all of this sidechain out 1, 2, 3, 4, and it starts to looking like a spaghettified mess. And this was hard for me to get used to, but then once I developed good habits, then I couldn't stop doing it this way. You can see I've run out here into my first sidechain, and then this is actually, boom, that's my actual vocal lead out. Okay, so that's that. Then what happens after that? Then we start splitting off and sidechaining to additional utilities and to instruments. So let's see, where's this guy go? I'll get all the way over. So our acoustic guitar. And like I said before, you can, in the case of this acoustic guitar, I actually did this multiband compressor, and it's compressing specific bands, or you can just sidechain it out to just a regular compressor. You don't have to worry about the bands themselves. Let's see if we can solo that and illustrate it. Alright, so what's happening here? So we've run it out, the vocals over here, and then here they are, and so if we change the threshold there, it becomes much more obvious. And hopefully you can hear that, that it's smashing the sound in that range. Everybody has questions about compression and how much you should use and how you should use it and when you should use it and how much is too much. And the answers are usually frustrating because there's no right answer. It's all situational. Like, I have a really good friend who's a professional engineer, and when I was trying to learn compression, I contacted him and he was like, I usually do this for guitars, but it depends. And like, depends on what? And that's the thing that you have to learn yourself, is that every situation is different. So, there's the secret sauce is you don't know until you've done it so much that you know. So every situation is different. Anyways, so I got on a tangent there. Sidechaining. So I've sidechained primarily just the vocals in this. If we were getting real crazy and fancy, then I would probably sidechain there'd be an additional sidechain for my guitars, so they're not stepping on each other so much, or you can automate the volume if you prefer. And then I didn't sidechain my kick and bass, because this was just a basic track, but that would be another one that's common. That you'll see, this spaghettified mess is what you see on a lot of Reason Default stuff for demos that they send out, or it's rolled into the release, and that's what's going on. They're using it as a side chain, and you end up having to have, because there's only 4 outs for these splitters, you got one in, and then you got 3 things that you can split it off to, and then you have to use the 4th one to then go to another splitter. So it would be better if there were 8 maybe, but at the time, this is a legacy utility rack inserts. That worked. I mean, it still works. You just end up having a ton of things. And I've had literally 8 of these, just splitting off to everywhere on stuff. That is not uncommon at all. There's my lead vocal, and you can see I did. It does have its own reverb, and I used in both my reverbs. See, like this reverb, this vocal has a plate spreader reverb. That one, soft vocals reverb. So I was specifically trying to use different ones for each one, because your background vocals don't necessarily need to have the same reverb on them that your foreground vocals do, because you want your foreground vocals to jump out more in most cases. So similar to what I did with the acoustic guitar, I have a multiband compressor for the background vocals, and you can see sidechain in here that's running up from our friend, the lead vocals. So I'm smashing the range here that the vocals are overlapping in. First, like I smashed it a bunch, and then I went to I messed with the threshold, and it just took a little bit of playing with to find what the right level was. But eventually I got there, and I was happy with it. And that's, again, going back to what I was saying before, that's kind of what compression's like. You'll know after you do it enough, here's the things that I'm probably going to do, but every situation is different and every instrument is different. You have to do it to taste every single time. Can you just lock and load with some presets? Absolutely. And will they work a lot of the time? Yes. Will they be perfect? Probably not. They usually require some tweaking, but depending on how picky you're going to be and what it's for, then you may not need to tweak them. So that's the rack, and those are my best practices and things that I usually do in this type of track. I would say this is commercial genre, if it's anything. It's pretty bland, but that's kind of the whole point here. It's not about the music; it's about the process. So let's look at the sequencer here. Drums, you can see I did kick, snare, hi-hats, ride crash, kabasa, fills. And then within, when I'm programming drums, and the reason it's like this is I will do different grooves. So I've got Janet on here. So Janet on those three. And then on B1, I've got straight shaker for the kabasa. So, because I don't want that to be swung. I want it to be straight. And then fills, I have nothing because I want the fills to be straight. And you get weird stuff happens when you run fills through regroove. So number one, with your drums, that's just a best practice that I've found is super useful. Kick, snare, hi, split them up. It's not as used to be a real pain to hop between tracks, but now it's much easier. They finally fixed that, and I think in the last version, a reason they fixed it. Split that up. You'll be very happy you did afterwards. And you can see with some of these, I've color coded some things, and this is a little bit of an overkill in this particular instance because there's not that much variation. But when you have a really complicated track, color coding helps. In some cases, I would do something like color all of it, one color, so that I'm like, okay, here's the verse. The verse is brown because they did away with the little division things. I can't even remember what they were called now, but I used those as dividers. I didn't usually use them to actually set up my tracks, but I would use them to and I would label it verse, and then this would be chorus or pre-chorus or A or B or whatever you want to call them, and that just helped with my visually making sense of it. And so the color coding, I find, matters. If you are someone who is just visually inclined, then just give it a try. That's an easy best practice that you can see. You'll know real quick if you like it. Part of that color coding is if there's some variation in parts, I will do that so I don't accidentally copy and paste something. My guitar intro is not the same as the verse guitar. They're very similar, but they're not the same. And I didn't want to copy and paste my guitar intro and use the same part as verse guitar. So that's just kind of like a visual reminder, oh no, this is a different part. Don't use that part here. And you can do it. You can change your colors for everything. So there have been times where I knew I needed to edit a part, and so I just color everything in one section bright red, and I knew when I reopened it the next time, oh yeah, okay, I got to edit that part that's red. So just as a just little stuff like that as a reminder. So let's talk about labels. You can see that I have labeled everything here: kick intro, kick A section, snare A section, hats A section, ride, kabasa, and it's real handy when you've got tons of different fills, or even you say you're working with drums where you've got a crash, a splash, a crash ride, and 6 different cymbals. and you're going to be going between those and using them for accents. So it's like, oh, this is crash. Okay, well, boom, I can just drop it in there. Oh, this is crash ride, or this is ride. Okay, cool. I can just drop this in wherever I need to, and I don't have to redraw it or redo it, and it's on its own track. So I don't have to worry about working it into the mix. It just saves. These are just a little time saver. And the labeling of each section, like if in this case I copied and pasted, right? Hats a section, they're the same thing, but I will frequently, like, I'll do like a prime or a double prime or a triple prime as an indicator that it's like, no, this is the A section, but I changed something in it, so it's a variation. Or you can just write hats A section variant, VAR or something like that. But using those labels helps. And if you don't know how, you right click on it, and you right here where it says remove labels from clips. We're gonna add labels to clips. So hats A section. And when you add a label over here, it will pop up, and you can then label whatever you want that channel to be named. So for the sequencer section, that's most of the little tricks that I'll use. There's probably some other things that I do without even thinking about it, but that's a big part of it. So we can talk about the mixer a little bit. I don't have a ton here. This is, again, it's a small track. There's not a lot going on, so not a ton of stuff that I did in this one. But drum bus, I will take all my tracks and group them, because sometimes, like, the order that you see here is just something wackadoo and doesn't have anything to do with anything. So I'll take them all and sort them all so that they're all close together. Like guitar, strat edge, and then okay, cool, and then there's my bass. So I put my string section right there all together, and then vocal, those are together. Just easier to find stuff that way. When you get into something with 30 tracks and like say you got horns and you got other instruments, then it's real handy then. And then all of your buses, if you have multiple buses, put all your buses together. Save yourself some trouble. Like I mentioned before, I didn't do a whole lot with the EQ on this particular track, but so we got the female Vox, we got acoustic guitar, did a little bit with, and like this is one of those, and it's like, don't forget it exists. Because it sure is nice to use that instead of having to drop a rack in. If you prefer to have something in the rack for your EQ, cool, use that. But when you're doing stuff like bandpass, and you don't need you're not trying to color the sound with some special VST that has this awesome EQ that makes it sound like it came from a mixing board in 1956 or whatever, then cool. If you just need to bandpass your, or high pass your shakers, then just use the high pass in there. Save yourself processing power, and you're going to get the same result. There is that. That's what these guys are, high pass and low pass. You see, I did not use the SSL compressor on this one, but this isn't, like, I didn't take this all the way to the end. It's not mastered. I mean, I could do more mixing. I can go crazy with it. But that's not what this track was about. This track was about providing an example. I have been known where, on a track where, like, if I had 30 tracks, there have been times where I have colored each track, like each section, the same thing. So, like, for example, I would do both of my vocals here in plum. So it's like when you're looking at 30 tracks going across the bottom here, and they're all, even when they're all different colors and you've grouped them together, it can still be hard to make sense of it, make heads or tails. So yeah, like if you had 5 vocal tracks and you have 6 or 7 guitar tracks, and then you got bass and drums thrown in there, but then you got drums and drum bus, like that's when, like, use that color coding. That really does help. And it's such a simple thing, and trust me. I mean, it definitely helped my workflow when I started doing that. One more little thing that you can't actually see, but is the function keys. Mostly I've been clicking on the screen here, but usually when I'm creating something, then I'm using the function keys because it's so much faster. So if you're not familiar with the function keys, get familiar. And this applies for Mac or for PC. So F4 is your on-screen piano keys. F5 is your mixer, F6 is your rack, F7 is your sequencer, and just knowing those helps. F8 is your groove window and your tool window for all your handy settings there. But F5, 6, and 7, super handy. If you can get in the habit of using those, you can save yourself a lot of time, because most of the time you're going to have one hand on the keyboard. And then you have the other hand on the mouse. So just a minor suggestion, but I found that it improved my workflow tremendously when I finally started using those. So there's a lot of information. If you have any questions about any of the stuff I just covered, then put it in the comments. I'm happy and expect to make a follow-up video to this. So if there's something that you see in here that I didn't mention, or I went over something too fast, then just please let me know, and I will be more than happy to address whatever your concern is, even little stuff. If it's easy to explain and I can make a video of it and explain it to you, then I'm happy to do it. So thanks for your eyes and ears on this. I hope that this helps your workflow in Reason and improves your mixes, and I look forward to getting feedback from you so that I know what you need to hear more of. So feel free to drop a comment in and like, subscribe, all that stuff goes. So until next time, thanks. Cheers.